Hi, good afternoon, everyone that is joining us for this update to the Indiana State Materials Management Plan. I will go ahead and give it just a minute more to let people start joining and make sure we're all here, and we'll get started shortly. Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to this update on the Indiana Materials Management plans and our progress so far. I'm going to give a quick overview, housekeeping, and then hand it over to our vendor Eunomia for a presentation. So thank you for joining. I am Deanna Garner, Recycling Market Development Program Manager at IDEM's Office of Program Support. All microphones are currently muted. For attendance tracking, if you guys could take a moment to write your name and affiliation in the chat box, that would be helpful. We will be taking questions and comments from participants at the end of today's meeting. All participants will be able to unmute themselves and ask questions or make comments at that time. If you have a question or technical issue during the presentation, please use the raise hand or chat feature. For those on the phone, if you have a question or comment, you can raise your hand by pressing *9, and we will call on you at the appropriate time. When called upon, you'll need to unmute your phone by pressing *6. If any members of the media have joined us, please utilize the chat feature, or you may email rmdpgrants@idem.in.gov with any questions or if you would like to schedule an interview. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on IDEM's website, recycle.in.gov.
I have to have a webinar. I have to have a webinar on there talking, but I don't think they can hear.
Okay, and please, if your microphones are on, please mute them at this time. Great. I just wanted to provide a quick intro first of IDEM and our role in solid waste and recycling. IDEM does provide the regulatory basis for environmental quality in the state, supports efforts to reduce waste, conserve resources, and pollute less. Our legislation and framework allows for permitting, data collection and reporting, creation of solid waste management districts, provisions for education and technical assistance, as well as establishing the recycling market development and community recycling grants. On this particular project that we were able to do through EPA grant funding for the SWIFR, the solid waste infrastructure grants, we have project staff working on it, myself, Deanna Garner, Tom Lees, Jacob Smicker, and Pat Daniel. We're all always available and happy to answer any questions. We will provide email in the chat box that you can send feedback at this time or any questions or meetings to at any time after the meeting as well. With that, I'm going to let the team from Eunomia introduce themselves and start the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Deanna. This is the Indiana State Materials Management Plan project update. So thank you all for taking the time to join us today. I think some of you may have been on the first virtual call, so I'll just briefly reintroduce Eunomia for those who are new. We are a research and consulting firm specializing in circular economy and sustainability. For more than 23 years, we've supported both public and private sector clients, including state and local governments across the US and internationally. My name is Iris, and I'm the project coordinator. And today I'm joined by Wynn Cowman, the project director, and John Carhart, the lead modeler. We've prepared an update about the materials management plan, and during the Q&A session, like Deanna said, both our team and the IDEM team will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So before we dive into the details, here's a quick look at today's agenda. We will start with a project overview to revisit what the materials management plan is and our key objectives. Then we'll walk through the model and the baseline that we've been working on. The model is built around two key inputs, so priority materials and levers for waste management and diversion, which we will explain in a little bit more detail. And then finally, we will wrap up with a recap of the progress to date and outline the next steps. And we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So some of you may already be familiar with the context and background of the materials management plan, so I'll just provide a quick overview for anyone new that's joining us today. This project is funded through the EPA's Solid Waste Infrastructure for Recycling State and Territory Grant, otherwise known as the SWIFR grant. And this plan will guide Indiana's approach to materials management and will help the state work towards a 50% recycling goal. As part of this effort, we want to understand what the current waste management strategies, gaps, and challenges are, and then ensure that we engage stakeholders throughout the process. This plan also aims to promote economic growth in Indiana through waste management practices and provide support to local waste management districts across the state. So on our last call, we provided an overview of the project and our approach. So the focus for this call will be providing an update on the progress that we've made so far. So this project began in December 2024 and is expected to conclude in November 2025, and there are 5 key phases. Since the first call, which was held in April, we've completed the research and data gathering phase to build the baseline, which forms the foundation of the model, and we'll discuss this further in the next part of this presentation. We have also assessed the gaps and opportunities through desk research, surveys, and interviews with key stakeholders to explore potential strategies for improving waste diversion and reduction. Through an iterative process with IDEM, we've also come up with a short list of waste management and diversion levers, so like strategies and actions that we could apply to help us meet the 50% recycling goal. So in phase 4, where we currently are, we're working on building a model to help us understand the impacts of applying these levers, how we can get to the 50% recycling goal, and ultimately this will allow us to determine what the milestone targets could be. And lastly, in phase 5, we'll bring everything together into a comprehensive materials management plan, and we'll develop roadmaps for specific materials. So in this next section, I'll explain what we mean by model, because I've mentioned it a few times, and then what our approach is. So this slide breaks down how we're building the model that will support the materials management plan. The aim of the model is to help us understand how different actions and strategies, so what we're calling levers, could help us achieve the 50% recycling goal. So it's not about predicting what will happen, but rather showing us what's possible and what the impact could be. We start by understanding the baseline and looking at how much material is currently generated, how it's managed, and where there are potential opportunities. Then we prioritize the materials that we should focus on. So we look at which materials offer the greatest opportunities in terms of diversion potential, and then the value that could be recovered. Next, we identify and shortlist the most relevant strategies or levers, like expanding collection pathways or implementing stakeholder and public education campaigns. And finally, we can model the impact, meaning we apply these levers to the priority materials to understand what's possible when it comes to achieving that 50% recycling goal. So let's go into a little bit more detail about the baseline. The baseline tells us how much material is generated, how it's managed, whether it's recycled, landfilled, sent to waste to energy. And this step is important because it helps us understand where we're starting from. So in the next few slides, we'll walk through the data and the findings from the baseline assessment. So this slide shows 3 different perspectives of Indiana's current recycling performance based on how the waste stream is defined. So on the far right, you'll see the 15.2% recycling rate reported in the Indiana 2023 recycling report. And very similar to how EPA calculates their recycling rate, this 15.2% recycling rate also includes composting. If we expand to take into account materials like waste tires and construction and demolition, so C&D waste, then the recycling rate is 14.8%. And if we take a look at all of the solid waste, so all solid waste in Indiana, including materials that are difficult to recycle, such as foundry, coal ash, flue gas, and other non-municipal solid waste, then the recycling rate is 8.9%. So depending on how the waste stream is defined, the gap to reaching the 50% recycling goal ranges from 3.7 million to 5 million tons per year. So the purpose of this exercise is to give us a good and useful frame of reference and understanding of the current state. So this is our baseline. So let's zoom in a little bit. So instead of looking at the average recycling rate, let's look at the recycling rate by material. And this is based on the available data that we have. On the far left of the chart, we see that yard waste, tires, and wood waste have the highest recycling rates, above or near 50%, which is really great because this shows that the established programs that Indiana has in place are very effective. So in the middle, we have e-waste, glass, paper, and non-ferrous metal packaging that have more moderate recycling rates in comparison. And then the remaining materials here have lower recycling rates. So it should be noted here that for textiles and C&D, there was little to no quantitative data available to determine the recycling rate. So it's shown as 0% for textiles and 3% for C&D here, but this does not mean that there's no recovery and recycling happening. This is a limitation due to data availability. And also some C&D waste may also be found in the municipal solid waste stream as well. But what we wanted to highlight here is the yard waste, tires, and wood waste that have the highest recycling rates. And finally, scrap metal recycling isn't included here because scrap metal dealers aren't required to report into IDEM systems. So these estimates, like we said, are based on best available data. So Eunomia used additional metrics to determine which materials to prioritize for future diversion. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next section. If we switch gears and look at how much is disposed per capita for each material, we notice that there is a lot of paper, food waste, and C&D waste compared to other materials. And that's what we wanted to highlight here is these three. So on the right, you'll see a group of materials that we've labeled as having dedicated management. So we've grouped them here separately because they are typically managed through other systems that are distinct from municipal solid waste programs and handled outside of traditional recycling infrastructure. There may not be as much of an opportunity to divert these materials compared to some of the other materials that are found to have higher amounts of disposal. So we're going to focus on these other materials in the upcoming section. So now that we've looked at the baseline, let's take a look at how we identified the priority materials. So in this next step, we're looking at materials with high potential for diversion. So this means they have high generation volumes, a lot of it is being generated, but low current recycling rates, and also high potential value if we recover them. By prioritizing these materials for the model, we can focus on where we can feasibly have the greatest potential impact. So in the following slides, we'll walk through how we prioritize these materials. So let's take a quick step back and look at all of the materials that are in scope for this materials management plan. So this plan is going to include discussions on all of the material streams shown in this slide to reflect the range of materials that are managed across Indiana. From the survey responses that we have received, it'll also include discussion on emerging waste streams like vaping devices, solar panels, and EV and lithium batteries. And you can see highlighted on the right are the materials that we will prioritize for the model. And this was determined by looking at two things. The first being diversion potential, and the second being value recovered. Again, the plan will take into account all of these materials, but not all will be part of the model. So let's first take a look at diversion potential. So this chart shows the estimated tons of each material disposed annually in Indiana. And just to note here that the materials with dedicated management pathways that we saw earlier, like coal ash, that's not included here. We can see on the left that materials like paper, food waste, and C&D stand out as the largest contributors and could offer the greatest opportunities for increased diversion by weight compared to the other materials here. So to estimate these figures, we use Indiana's tonnage data and more recent waste characterization studies from nearby states, just because Indiana's most recent study was completed in 2012 and focused on the residential sector only. The studies that we referenced reflected both residential and commercial sectors, giving us a bit of a more complete and up-to-date picture. And by looking at diversion potential in this way, it gives us a sense of where the potential impact opportunities are, which based on this graph is paper, food waste, and C&D that kind of stand out. So in addition to diversion potential, we also looked at the value that's being lost to disposal. So this chart here shows the estimated material revenue lost annually for each material. In other words, how much value could potentially be recovered if these materials were diverted away from landfill or incineration. And you can see from the graph here that for non-ferrous metal packaging, so particularly aluminum, that has the greatest loss value, and then it's followed by plastic and then paper. So these materials contribute significantly to the total value being lost each year, even if they don't make up the largest tonnages. So what we saw before was diversion tonnages, and now we're looking at the value. So when we're prioritizing materials for modeling, we considered both the volume going to disposal and the relative value of those materials to identify where the greatest opportunities could be. So based on our analysis, we identified 6 materials to prioritize in the model. Fiber and paper, plastic packaging, metal packaging, and glass all fall under municipal solid waste and will be analyzed together as the packaging and paper product stream. And then we'll also look at food waste and C&D waste. So this is based on what I just showed earlier on how we prioritize them. And now that we've prioritized the materials, the next step is to quantify the impact of increasing the diversion for each of these materials, and then understand how that contributes to the 50% recycling target. And if we're talking about the impact of increasing diversion, we now need to determine how we will increase the diversion, and that's where the levers come in. So let's move on to talking a little bit more about the levers. So when we say levers, we're referring to the strategies, programs, policies, and actions and initiatives that can help improve waste management and shift more material away from disposal. In the next few slides, we'll walk through the levers that were considered and how we shortlisted them. So we started this process by compiling a very long list of strategies, policies, programs, and initiatives that could improve waste management and diversion. So this list here draws on a mix of desktop research findings, project team expertise, and also other strategies that are being implemented in states within the US. So it includes a wide range of options from policy levers like deposit return systems and landfill bans. So some states may have landfill banning food waste from landfill, to initiatives like expanding collection programs and launching education campaigns. We also looked at sector-specific or material-specific levers at this stage. And this was a really good starting point, but we needed to make sure that the levers that we focus on are realistic, relevant, and applicable for Indiana. So after developing the long list of levers, we carried out a high-level screening exercise to assess how relevant each lever was for the materials that we prioritized. And this helped us to narrow down the options a little bit, and we got a medium list. So from there, we worked with IDEM to identify 6 assessment criteria to more robustly evaluate the levers. So each criteria was assigned a weight to reflect the relative importance. And then we defined what the scoring framework would look like. Like, how do we apply the assessment criteria? How are we scoring each lever? So using this framework, we then conducted a comprehensive red, amber, green assessment, and then scored each lever against each priority material. So what this means is, for example, if one of the levers is expanding collection pathways and one of the priority materials is food waste, then we're assessing how impactful and feasible is expanding collection pathways for food waste using the criteria and scoring framework that we identified. So this process gave us a more consistent way of evaluating and comparing the levers, and then the resulting shortlist was refined and finalized in collaboration with IDEM through an iterative review process. So that was a lot of information, and I'm going to move on to showing you what the shortlist looks like. Oh, sorry. Just a quick note on the assessment criteria and scoring framework. So this is the assessment criteria and scoring framework. There's a lot of text and information here, and I won't go into all of the details. But to summarize, we assess the levers based on the potential for waste diversion, how easily it could be tracked and integrated into existing reporting systems, how long it would take to implement, the costs and resource needs, the likelihood of stakeholder and political pushback, and finally, any additional co-benefits like job creation or emissions reduction. So based on the scoring process that we just walked through, we refined the long list to this set of 7 levers. So this table highlights which sectors they apply to, so commercial, residential, or both, and then the material streams that they affect. So let's kind of look through the list. So food waste diversion requirements would apply to commercial food waste generators like restaurants and grocery stores, requiring them to divert food waste from landfill to alternative pathways like composting, anaerobic digestion, or food donation. Investing in sorting and processing infrastructure refers to upgrading facilities like MRFs to increase capacity or improve recovery. Recycling requirements refer to mandating households to separate recyclable materials from the regular trash for collection by municipal or private waste haulers. Stakeholder and public education campaigns are important for raising awareness and providing consistent and clear messages on proper recycling practices. And recycling targets refer to the interim targets that we could set on the path to Indiana's broader 50% recycling goal. Investments in expanding collection pathways could include adding more drop-off sites, hosting more community collection events, or increasing curbside recycling options to improve access and increase participation. And finally, a per ton disposal surcharge would add a fee to every ton of waste sent to landfill or incineration, making disposal a more expensive and creating financial incentive to recycle or compost instead. So these are the levers that our model will focus on. So now let's recap the progress we've made so far and talk a little bit more about the next steps. So on the left, you can see the key tasks that have been completed so far. We finished the baseline assessment, as we showed, to kind of understand the current recycling and disposal in Indiana. We identified the priority materials to focus on, and then finalized that short list of levers, and that kind of tells us where the greatest potential impacts are. And then finally, we conducted surveys and interviews with key stakeholders like solid waste management districts and recyclers to inform our analysis. Although a key item to note here is that we're still accepting input from MRFs. And then on the right, you'll see what is currently in progress. So we are now modeling the impacts of implementing those shortlisted levers. So what does that look like? What is the impact? And then we're also drafting and writing the content for the materials management plan. And stakeholder engagement continues to be a very important part of this project, and it'll be ongoing throughout this project. And on the topic of stakeholder engagement, we've been working to ensure that we take in stakeholder input throughout the project. And this timeline shows how stakeholder input has been integrated at each stage, from the initial data collection to our upcoming opportunities for public input. So as a quick recap, we had the first virtual call in April. We introduced the project objectives, timeline, and data needs. And since then, we've sent surveys and interviewed key stakeholders, so like the solid waste management districts, facilities like composters and recyclers. And then looking ahead, IDEM will be hosting regional open houses across Indiana from late August to mid-September, where we will collect public input and feedback. And then finally, in November, we will present the materials management plan back to the key stakeholders and public. And that is how we hope to have stakeholder input throughout the process. So now looking forward to the next steps, IDEM will be announcing the schedule for regional open houses where stakeholders such as yourself and the general public will have an opportunity to provide feedback on the materials management plan. For everyone who has participated in the surveys, interviews, or provided us with any data, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. We've gathered some great insights, but that being said, we're still looking for some input from MRFs in Indiana. If you haven't had a chance to complete the survey or connect with us, we'd love to hear from you, and you can reach out through this email highlighted here. And as we continue to make progress on this, the IDEM team will share updates and relevant links to the website, so please keep an eye out for that. And lastly, if you have any questions after this session, please feel free to email the team. The email is just on this slide here. So I know that that was a lot of information. I'm going to pause here for questions, and I'll hand it back to IDEM to lead this Q&A session.
Great. Thank you, Iris. So yes, thank everybody for attending this call, and we got a lot of good information and great updates from Eunomia. At this time, you guys can raise your hand and we can call on you for questions, or there's probably we're pretty informal here. So if you want to just speak up if you have a question, or type it in the chat box if you're more comfortable with that avenue. And again, I just want to emphasize what Iris said about feedback being essential. You guys are the stakeholders across Indiana that make this system successful. So we want to hear from you at any time. If there's a question or anything after this call that you hadn't thought of, and you want to send it, mmp@idem.in.gov. I'm going to provide that again in the chat as well. You guys can send those, and those will get to me as well as Eunomia. And we will be a little bit more on those open houses. We are hosting 4 of those regionally in the basically 4 corners, northeast, south, and west, as well as a central additional 5th one in the central office. Those will be announced very shortly. So those will also be on our website. So keep an eye out for those. Iris, I think you might have it easy today. I am not seeing anybody with questions for us today. All right, I was gonna just give it a little bit more time. If there's nothing else, I guess we can give you guys a little bit more of your time back in this quick update. Again, happy to hear from you guys. So send your questions our way. Send any feedback as well. Iris, any last minute thoughts from you?
No last minute thoughts. Just thank you all so much for attending this session. Like Deanna said, if you have any questions, please feel free to email us, especially if you're a Murph in Indiana. It'd be great to hear from your input. Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah. And I'll call out those Murphs in particular. I see you guys on this call. I know you guys are here. So we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback is important. All right. With that, thank you guys for attending. And you'll hopefully be hearing from us soon.
So much.
Thanks, guys.